great to have Steven Pinker on the podcast. Dr. Pinker is the Johnstone Professor of Psychology at Harvard University, a two-time Pulitzer Prize finalist, and the winner of many awards for his research, teaching, and books. He has been elected to the National Academy of Sciences and named one of Time's 100 most influential people and one of Foreign Policy's 100 leading global thinkers. His books include How the Mind Works, The Blank Slate, The Stuff of Thought, The Better Angels of Our Nature, The Sense of Style, Enlightenment Now, and most recently, Rationality, What It Is, Why It Seems Scarce, Why It Matters. Steven Pinker, so great to have you back on the Psychology
Thanks,
Podcast.
Scott. Nice to be here.
I always enjoy talking to you. You always stimulate my brain, which is the motto of our podcast, is that we stimulate people's brains, but you stimulate my brain. So you say in this new book of yours, you argue that quote, rationality ought to be the lodestar for everything we think and do. Why is that?
The very fact that you're asking that question and waiting for my answer means you've already accepted the answer, namely that we ought to persuade each other with good reasons. Now, it's not the only way that we can get other people's assent. We can bribe them, we can threaten them, we can beat them up, we can try to cancel them. But if you're tossing out a question, waiting for the answer, presumably pondering what I'm saying, then you have already committed yourself to reason. Reason is just the water we swim in, it's the air we breathe.
Well, but the key part of that sentence that I asked you is the everything we do. I must ask, must we always follow reason? Do I need a rational argument for why I should fall in love, cherish my children, enjoy the pleasures of life? Isn't it sometimes okay to go crazy, to go wild, to silly, to just stop making sense?
Absolutely. And there is a false dichotomy between reason and goals, motivation, emotion. But as thinkers going back at least to David Hume have noted, reason is a means to an end. It's a way of achieving a goal using knowledge. It can't tell you what the goal is. If you enjoy pain, if you enjoy being miserable and hungry and cold, well, reason can help you accomplish that if that's what you want to accomplish, and it isn't going to tell you that that's not something you ought to accomplish. But whatever it is you want to accomplish, reason is the way you gain it. But the goals are not part of reason per se. Although, I'm going to add an asterisk there, one still can rationally talk about goals, such as what happens when two or more of your goals come into conflict, such as having fun now versus being comfortable and respected in the future. And there are also rational arguments to be had when one person's goals clash with another, and that brings us into the domain of morality. But there's nothing irrational about falling in love or dancing and partying, or nothing. There's nothing irrational about them.
Rationality, I want to just talk about a second. What is rationality? Because I'm a big fan of Keith Stanovich's work, and I was really excited to see that you quoted him in your book. Now, he often distinguishes between two types of rationality in his work. He distinguishes between instrumental rationality and epistemic rationality. Your definition of rationality seems to be the merger, but it's like the pithy condensing of both. So you define rationality as the ability to use knowledge to attain goals. It kind of combines both instrumental and epistemic.
In a way, yes, and that is a fundamental distinction, sometimes framed as the distinction between what is true and what to do, or pure reason and practical reason. The reason that I merged them in my own attempt at a definition, namely the use of knowledge to attain goals, is that even when it comes to epistemic rationality, what is true, we don't really consider someone rational who's just, say, spitting out the digits of pi till for all eternity, or just stating, using logic to state true but useless facts, like either Paris is the capital of France or unicorns exist, either Paris is the capital of France or the moon is made of cheese. I mean, those are all true, but we tend not to consider it to be particularly rational just to say true stuff. Even in epistemic rationality, we have some goal of understanding the world, expanding our knowledge base. We have goals for which truths we prioritize. So that's why I merged them. But you're right that one could say that there is a logical distinction between them.
And at its base, I mean, rationality helps you get the things that you want. And it's very interesting, the goal conflict thing. I'm not over that yet, because I think that I think about that all the time, because we can have two long-term goals that conflict within ourselves, right? It's not always like a goal conflict is some short-term one weighing it against a long-term. It can be, we can have two long-term goals. And what is is there like a system in the brain, like a meta rationality system that can help us adjudicate two rational potential avenues we could be taking?
It makes complete sense. But the way I would put it is rationality is itself meta. That is, if you had a meta rationality, then you say, well, gee, do we have yet another part of the brain for the meta rationality? But taking a leaf, turtles all the way down or all the way up, but taking a leaf from the field of linguistics and cognitive science, which going back at least to Noam Chomsky and George Miller, emphasized the power of recursive computation and recursive representation. Namely, an idea can contain an idea, including an example of itself. A reasoning process can step back and consider its own shortcomings or flaws, and we can then in turn step up a level and criticize the criticism of our reasoning. And there's as long as you have the computational power to embed a proposition in a proposition or have a routine call an instance of itself, that automatically makes it meta for as many levels as you want, until the mind boggles because it just gets too complicated to keep track of them. But it is essential, and I'm glad you mentioned this, that not only when it comes to adjudicating among long-term goals, much harder. I mean, we all, of course, are faced with the tension between immediate gratification and longer-term satisfaction. I mean, that's just kind of the stuff of self-control, of maturity. But you're right that we often have long-term goals that come into conflict. And I could consider in talking about reasoning about goals, I think of adjudicating among goals within a person to be kind of what we mean when we talk about wisdom, and adjudicating among goals of different people, kind of what we mean when we talk about ethics and morality. But yeah, there's no obviously correct answer to how should I trade off creating my masterpiece with spending time with my kids. Both of them are long-term goals, at least building a satisfying relationship with your kids. And it is part of the agony of being a mature adult that one has to grapple with these conflicts, and there's no single correct answer.
Yeah. There's a question I want to ask you, and it's opening up a can of worms. What is truth? Because I've heard other very smart people attempt to discuss such a topic, and it can go in a very long, conversation direction. But I feel like that's kind of the elephant in the room when we talk about rationality. Truth is a very important part of rationality. You want to use correct knowledge, right, to attain goals. You don't want to use, your definition, the ability to use knowledge to attain goals. The inference there is that the ability to use correct knowledge. Yeah. There's a lot of knowledge going around these days.
Well, according to one sort of fairly well-known characterization of knowledge borrowed from the field of philosophy, knowledge is sometimes defined as justified true belief. So by definition, knowledge is true. If it isn't, we don't call it knowledge, we call it belief. We don't say John knows the moon is made of cheese, although we could say John believes the moon is made of cheese. When you use know and knowledge, you're kind of committing yourself to truth behind the scenes. But you're right, it does raise the question of what do we mean by truth? And again, this is a question much discussed in the field of philosophy and in many ways above my pay grade. A famous definition of truth from Tarski is that to say that X is true is to say X. Now that for many people that's not particularly satisfying, or truth is what is the case, but it's like reason. It doesn't submit to a conventional definition because it's deeper than that. You can't have a definition of reason unless you know how to reason. You can't talk about truth unless you already are grounded in some tacit commitment to truth. Otherwise, nothing that you say would be, in a sense, worth saying. It'd be, oh, I'll take it or leave it. I'm just making noise with my mouth. I'm not making any claim to anything that is factually accurate or worthy of your belief. So we're kind of committed to truth even when we start to persuade, explain. And I think, one way of parsing this somewhat enigmatic definition of truth, that to say X is true is to say X, is that it's just kind of what we mean when we say stuff in the first place. And so there is something almost superfluous about saying, differentiating between the world is round is true and the world is round.
I mean, this just raises the question, can it be rational in certain instances to be completely delusional as well about something, but in a way that delusion if it in itself is what gets you to attain your goal, then would that be the more rational thing to have incorrect knowledge?
Well, it could be, one could say that it'd be, we relativize it and say that it is a rational way to attain a particular goal. I don't think we would call it, and again, I'm, especially as someone who is very interested in words, I know that it's not up to me to legislate the meaning of words. When I answer a question of does the word apply, I'm kind of tapping into the community's intuitions of when it's natural to use the word. So if the word means what people understand the word to mean, and I think so the answer to your question, is it rational, is really, would most people use the word rational in describing that? And I think most people would not. I mean, unless you narrow it and say, is this a rational way of doing what everybody wants to do? But is it rational to believe things that we, standing outside that person, know to be false? I think no. The answer is no. And my own, admittedly, somewhat makeshift definition of rationality, namely the use of knowledge to attain goals, well, packed into that is knowledge. And as we spoke about just a couple of minutes ago, the conventional understanding of knowledge is justified true belief. And so true is packed into that. So in a sense, in the most general sense, no, you can't be rational if you believe things that are not true, at least if there are reasons for you to know that it's not true, or reasons for us to know that it's not true.
Yeah, Stephen, this is really interesting. I mean, this is really interesting. So you distinguish between logic and reasoning. Can you be completely illogical about something but still make a rational decision about it?
I don't think you can be illogical, but you have to apply a lot more than logic, because the problem about logic is that it basically just expands what is already in the premises. If something is true, then it tells you, some other things that are true, and some things that aren't true, and some things that might or might not be true. But because rationality involves the pursuit of some goal, even if the goal is understanding something more deeply or more accurately, logic doesn't get you there. You've got to. There are just too many things you can prove. You can prove all kinds of, crazy but irrelevant things. If P is Q, then P or Q is true, and so is P or Q or R, or P or Q or R or S, and you could spin out all kinds of useless true statements indefinitely. So logic isn't enough. Moreover, if you are applying nothing but logic, there's a sense in which that can be irrational, in the sense that you are deliberately foregoing the use of possibly relevant knowledge. The point about logic is it's formal in the sense that logic actually doesn't care about the content of sentences. It cares only about their form, about how propositions, predicates, and arguments are joined by ands and ors and ifs and nots and alls and necessary and possible. But it really kind of doesn't care what those sentences are about, whether they're about the moon being made out of cheese or little green men emerging from flying saucers. A predicate is a predicate, and then logic allows you to apply that predicate to new sentences. In real life, And not only is that what logic is all about, but if you're really being a logician, you may not make inferences that aren't licensed by the premises and the conclusions. You may not kind of drag in your knowledge, your beliefs, your conjectures. And that's kind of a crazy thing to do. So, for example, if you're a geometry student and you're asked to prove that in an isosceles triangle, the two angles are equal. Now, a perfectly rational thing to do would be pull out a protractor and measure one angle and measure the other angle and say, hey, they're the same as best I can tell. Now, you don't get credit on a geometry test if you do that, even though in real life, that's exactly what you might do. But you're not using the rules of the system, namely the rules, in this case, of Euclidean geometry, which allow a certain number of axioms and rules of inference, and you have to stick to those. You can't pull out your ruler and your protractor. That's not very rational, but that's what strict logic demands. And likewise in all kinds of reasoning. And many experiments show that people are, in this sense, illogical but rational, or at least non-logical but rational. They can't help but mixing logic in with their real-world knowledge, even though, strictly speaking, logic doesn't care about real-world knowledge. So if you say, for example, all plant matter is healthy, tobacco is plant matter, therefore tobacco is healthy. Is that a valid inference? And the answer is yes, it's a valid inference. If all x is y and p is x, then p is y. That's what the rules tell you. Now you give that to people and you say, solve this just as a logic problem, and they won't do it. They can't block out of their heads an idea. Tobacco, that's really toxic substance. What are you talking about? It's healthy. I say, no, forget what you know about tobacco. Just pay attention to the all and the is. And ordinary people have a lot of trouble doing that. And so is that irrational? Well, not in everyday life, but it is illogical in the sense that in the actual application of the rules of logic, you're breaking the rules of the game. Now, there are some cases where in fact, we don't want people to be so rational. We want them to be logical. So, for example, if we have a moral principle, you may not prejudge someone by their race or religion. If you're screening for terrorists, for example, even if you have statistical data that say that people of one religion are more likely to be suicide terrorists than people of another religion, there's a sense in which it would be more rational to scrutinize them more. We decide on moral grounds, no, you can't do it. You got to follow the rule, all people have equal rights. So the ability to at least to sometimes turn on our logic and ignore what we know. Likewise in the courtroom, there may be evidence that's highly relevant to the case, but if it was illegally obtained, if it was inadmissible because it referred to the person's criminal record or racial statistics, we say, we're going to follow this strict logical rule system. You must throw out what you as an ordinary person know. So there's sometimes when it's actually good that we're not so, that we can turn off the totality of our rationality and apply rules exactly. Or another example is a dolphin a fish or a mammal? Well, if we apply everything we know, well, fish, they swim, they're streamlined, they live in the ocean. You'd say, yeah, a dolphin is a fish. When we apply kind of the strict logic of science, namely a fish belongs to one class and mammals to another, and if you are warm-blooded and suckle your young and have fur, then you're a mammal, even if you look like a fish. Well, then again, we're turning off our knowledge, applying strict definitions and rules in a more logical mode of thinking, and that's what makes science possible.
I've been on the search for the perfect mattress for the past few years, and let me tell you, I've gone through so many mattresses. My friends have made fun of me because for so long I didn't actually own a mattress. I just went through so many free trials. I had no idea what it feels like to be well rested until I tried a Helix mattress. Are you not able to sleep because of stress and anxiety? It's definitely understandable given the current state of the world. Psychological research shows that high-quality sleep is so important for stress and well-being, though. Lack of quality sleep can affect your memory, increase mood swings, and even can lead to depression. While a number of factors contribute to poor sleep quality, your choice of mattress can really matter a lot. Helix Sleep makes personalized mattresses right here in America and ships them straight to your door with free, no-contact delivery, free returns, and a 100-night sleep trial. To choose a mattress, Helix made a quiz that takes just 2 minutes to complete and matches your body type and sleep preferences to the perfect mattress for you. If you like a mattress that's really soft or firm, you sleep on your side or your back or your stomach, or you sleep really hot, with Helix there's a specific mattress for each and everyone's unique taste. Personally, I took the quiz and I was matched with the Helix Sunset Luxe because I wanted something that felt soft, and I sleep mostly on my side all night. I've got to say, I love my Helix mattress. I wake up really feeling refreshed and ready to work out or start my work. Also, I've been tracking my sleep with a device, and my sleep score is consistently in the good or excellent range. This is a new thing for me, so it's really exciting to finally get high quality sleep. I really do love Helix, but you don't have to take my word for it. Helix was awarded the #1 best overall mattress pick of 2020 by GQ, Wired Magazine, and Apartment Therapy. Just go to helixsleep.com/psychology, take their 2-minute sleep quiz, and they'll match you to a customized mattress that will give you the best sleep of your life. They have a 10-year warranty, and you get to try it out for 100 nights risk-free. They'll even pick it up for you if you don't love it, but you probably will. Right now, Helix is offering up to $200 off all mattress orders and 2 free pillows for our listeners at helixsleep.com/psychology. Get up to $200 off all mattress orders and 2 free pillows at helixsleep.com/psychology. That's helixsleep.com/psychology. Okay, now back to the show. You know, doesn't that contradict your idea that rationality ought to be the lodestar for everything we think and do? Didn't that just contradict that?
Well, there's a kind of it's a good question, and there's a kind of meta rationality where we can decide, depending on our goals, what tools of rationality to apply and which ones to sideline. So if our goal, for example, if our goal is justice, that's not the same goal as, say, efficiency or the best actuarial statistics. And we might decide, well, justice is more important. Let's turn off our statistical reasoning. Let's apply this ironclad rule. And if your higher level goal is justice, then again, since rationality is always in pursuit of a goal, you might decide that one kind of rational thinking must be disabled and another kind deployed.
You make a point in your book that there can be no trade-off between rationality and social justice or any other moral or political cause. That's a heavy statement. I really want to unpack that for our listeners because I think that people's intuitions is not that. Yes, right. I don't think a lot of people's intuitions. Yeah. So can you unpack what you mean by that, and then we can get into the essential features of morality as you do in your book.
Yeah, if you believe that social justice can be itself be justified, there are reasons to pursue it. It's not just a battle between our side and the bad guys. Now, admittedly, a lot of people who claim to pursue social justice are doing that. But, in which case they've got to live with the possibility that the other side might be stronger than them and crush them. But if they're hoping to persuade open-minded third parties, if they're hoping to have reasons for what they do, then you've got to follow the laws of reason. Including factual accuracy. Is it the case that, for example, African Americans are disadvantaged relative to white people? There are a lot of people on the right who would say, no, it's the other way around. It's white people who are oppressed, white working class people. Well, if you think they're wrong, you better have reasons to show why they're wrong. If you think that particular measures, such as reparations, such as compensatory policies, are morally justified, well, either they are or they aren't. And if they are, then you should be able to provide those reasons. If you can't, then, maybe you should rethink them, but you're certainly not going to recruit others, or at least you're not going to recruit others who are open-minded and aren't just joining a mob for the fun of being part of a mob. Now, you could concede that it's all about mob rule. Our mob is bigger than their mob. But again, if you do that, then say goodbye to recruiting hitherto unaffiliated people, and say goodbye to claiming that you're right when the other side happens to be stronger than you are.
Do you feel like you're ever misunderstood?
Oh, you might say that.
I know the answer is honestly yes. I read an article. This comes up in my head because I read an article, a criticism of you, but it was framed in like, why is Steven Pinker far right now all of a sudden? And now I don't get the sense that you've suddenly become a far right, in terms of politics.
That would be an understatement. I'm on record as I think I'm the second largest contributor to the Democratic Party among Harvard faculty.
So let's get that on the record. Let's get that on the record.
As I sometimes say, a lot of academics and intellectuals live at a hypothetical place that I call the left pole. So, when you're at the North Pole, all directions are south. When you're at the left pole, all directions are right. And when you're sitting at the left pole, anything that diverges from a pretty rigid set of orthodoxies is considered, on the right. I consider that to be a pathology of some of the leftism in academia and journalism. That there's it is so rigid. It's such a catechism, like religious catechism. There's just no room for dissent, and just like anyone who doubts the Trinity is a heretic, anyone who doubts certain sets of axioms on the hard left is considered to be on the right. But no, certainly the right doesn't consider me to be on the right.
Yeah. It is interesting because it does seem like something has changed in the last 10 years or so, 5-10 years, where, maybe 20 years ago, if you published something, a scientific finding, and the finding had like it wasn't automatically politicized. It didn't automatically make you think the author must be on a certain political view because they're presenting a certain form of knowledge. But there's something these days about where the knowledge that you present is so inextricably intertwined with perceptions of your personal political stance. I just haven't seen that so tied together in my past. But it's so interesting. Like, you could just make a point about something where you think the evidence is suggesting, like, I think there might be some progress, when you look at data, and then they'll be like, oh, he's on the far right, because I feel like this is something new. Like, do you know what I mean?
I think it's not brand new. And I can recall, strains of it, way back when I was a college student, when there was the Marxist-Leninist Socialist United Workers' Party, and popular among students. You're right to have perceived a change, and I think things really took a lurch around 3-4 years ago. And John Haidt has written about this as well, where I think he fingered 2016 as the turning point. Now, I don't know if it's that Donald Trump suddenly polarized the whole country. I don't think so. I don't know.
Didn't help.
It sure helps. I don't know if it's because social media led to mutually reinforcing claques and cheerleading squads, or if there was just sometimes there are social trends that for chaotic and unpredictable reasons gain momentum that have a energy of their own. It's a good question.
Yeah, it's a fascinating, psychological.
Yes.
Phenomenon. You asked the question. It's funny. I would be reading your book, and then I would think a question to myself, and then the next page you'd ask that question. I guess you tried to think through what people would come up. So you ask, is knowledge always power? Sometimes it really is rational to plug your ears with wax. Ignorance can be bliss, and sometimes what you don't know can't hurt you. So can we riff off that idea a little bit? It is related to an earlier point I made about can you be rational by having irrational methods?
Yeah, you're absolutely right that it can. Here I was influenced by the great political theorist Thomas Schelling, who way back 60 years ago in his book, The Strategy of Conflict, explained a lot of puzzles and paradoxes of negotiation and bargaining and threats and promises, and articulated something that I think people have known probably for millennia, that sometimes there can be a strategic advantage to being ignorant, irrational, out of control. I mean, a simple example. You know that the Brinks truck that goes to the bank and picks up the sacks of money at the end of every day. And there's a sticker on the side of the truck that says, "Driver does not know combination of safe." So it's kind of flaunting his ignorance to his advantage, because if he doesn't know the combination, then you can't. Then the robber can't put a gun to his head and say, "Open the safe or I'll blow your brains out." And he can credibly say, "I just don't know the combination," and so it's useless to blow his brains out. So there are cases in which ignorance is a strategic advantage. There are cases in which powerlessness is a strategic advantage. If protesters lie in front of on the railroad tracks, then the engineer of the train could just keep going, knowing that they'll have to scramble if they want to save their own lives. On the other hand, if they handcuff themselves to the tracks, then the engineer's got to stop the train. Likewise, the suicide terrorist who has the explosives attached to his body that go off with the slightest jostling, out of his control, he can't be persuaded to run away, or he can't be attacked. And then there are also cases in which irrationality can be a strategic advantage. Namely, if someone can't be threatened, if their own self-interest means nothing to them, then you can't credibly threaten them, because they can threaten you right back by refusing to comply. In fact, they don't even have to threaten you back; they just have to be so crazy that there's no point. I mean, this is sometimes just called in the context of international relations, the madman theory, named after the alleged tactic that Richard Nixon deployed during the Vietnam War, flying nuclear-armed bombers alarmingly close to the Soviet border, allegedly to make the Soviets think that he was so unbalanced that they better not mess with him, and if they knew what was good with him, they better pressure their North Vietnamese clients to make concessions, like, "That guy's crazy. Don't deal with him." Or at least don't try to push him, because who knows what he might do. He might even do something that's crazy for himself. And in our interpersonal relations, many of us had experience with high maintenance romantic partners and hotheads and borderlines, and people who kind of get what they want because there's just no reasoning with them. So now the problem, of course, with these paradoxical tactics is that since you have taken yourself out of the game of persuasion and reason, you've kind of left the other guy no choice but to kind of take you out if they ever have the opportunity, because there's no reasoning with you. So it does come with that disadvantage. And of course, if both sides play it, as in a game of chicken, where, as it's often been noted, how do you win at chicken? Well, if you put a club on your steering wheel and then climb into the back seat, and a brick on the accelerator, so the car's no longer in your control, then the other guy's got to swerve. On the other hand, if it occurs to both teenagers to try that at the same moment, it can be a recipe for disaster. So even the rationality of the strategic rationality of irrationality can have its limits.
Sounds like you're describing most celebrity relationships as described in TMZ. TMZ news. Sounds like both of them are paradoxical rationality of irrational emotion. That's the technical term of this paradox.
Yes, right? Indeed. And to add to the sometimes mind-dizzying implications, we can also sometimes deploy them against ourselves. The most famous example being Odysseus, who was able to hear the sirens' songs without steering his ship onto the rocks, because he had his sailors plug their ears with wax and tie him to the mast. So he was incapable of ordering them to sail toward the sirens. They were not tempted by the sirens, so the voluntary incapacitation and the voluntary ignorance, in the case of Odysseus and his sailors respectively, was a higher order advantage in his own self-control. And we often do that. In fact, it's often considered the most effective means of self-control, rather than just exerting brute willpower, which is kind of beyond most of our powers. If you just make it impossible for you to succumb to temptation later, that is, don't buy the brownies in the first place. Then when you get hungry at midnight, you won't be tempted to eat them. Or if you are tempted to eat them, it won't matter because they're not there.
Totally. I've been meaning to buy one of these jars that you put your iPhone in at night, and you set a timer. It won't open it up for you.
Exactly. And it's sometimes called Odyssean self-control after the Odyssey.
Makes a lot of sense. Is it irrational to think taboo thoughts? And then my follow-up question, is it rational to condemn someone merely for the thinking of their thoughts?
Yeah, another fascinating topic on the possible, the boundary conditions for irrationality, where, and this is work by Philip Tetlock and some collaborators on the psychological phenomenon that we do tend to deem certain thoughts evil to think, even though one might reason that, no harm, no foul. What goes on in the privacy of your head is no one else's business. That's often not the way we think, or that discussing some things as hypothetical possibilities can be morally compromising. And Tetlock gives examples like the taboo trade-off. How much money should we spend to save a little girl's life? Now, you can't avoid making that decision, at least implicitly, because the hospital can't drain its entire budget to provide the absolute cutting-edge medical treatment for one sick child at the expense of all the other sick children. How much should we spend to preserve the environment, to save an endangered species? It seems kind of dirty to put a price on these things. In a sense, we don't have a choice, and often it's done kind of in the shadows so that we do it, but we don't talk about it. Or another example is the heretical counterfactual. This is what got Salman Rushdie into trouble for merely depicting an alternative life history of Muhammad, in which he was tempted by the devil instead of by God, and he nearly paid with his life when a fatwa was imposed on him by the Ayatollah Khomeini. That sounded a little exotic, so I actually came up with a real-life example that affects all of us. This is a true story that I heard of a party game that people played after dinner, where they said the game was, of course, none of us around this table are the least bit racist or bigoted or prejudiced. But let's just say hypothetically that you were. Which ethnic group would you be prejudiced against? Now, that's kind of a game you really don't want to play, even though you're not confessing to racism. There's something about confessing to hypothetical racism that's almost as bad as confessing to the real thing, if you're even allowing your mind to go there.
I saw a movie where they did that, and the wife broke up with the guy based on his answer. She said, "You would?" Really?
Well, maybe that's where it came from.
There was a movie. I'm going to try to remember what the movie was.
I remember my family dumped her boyfriend when he answered Jews. And then there's the what was the third type of trade-off is the heretical counterfactual, the taboo trade-off, and the forbidden base rate. If you are actually, we even touched on this earlier in the conversation. If you're screening at the airport for terrorists, are you allowed to consider the statistics of whether Buddhists, Catholics, Jews, Muslims, and Protestants, their base rate of committing terrorism? If you're a good Bayesian reasoner, that's exactly what you should do. In admitting someone to university, in judging them in a criminal courtroom, if you wanted the statistically cutting edge, state of the art, most accurate possible prediction of how well they would do, then you should throw into the equation their gender and their race and their religion. But that is, to say that's kind of emotionally icky would be an understatement, to say nothing of politically inflammatory. And so certain base rates we consider to be kind of immoral to think about. Now, and as Tedlock emphasizes, this is not completely irrational, because in our social lives, we pick our friends and our allies not just by what they do, but by who they are. Namely, has this potential friend, not just has he treated me well so far, but if the chips were down, and if he were ever tempted to stab me in the back when my back was turned, or to sell me down the river, would he? And of course, when we pick our allies, our friends, we want to peer into their soul and know what they're capable of, not just what they've done so far. And which thoughts they're capable of thinking is very much relevant to that judgment. If someone said, for how much money would you sell your child, or betray your spouse, or be unfaithful to your spouse, as in the movie Indecent Proposal? The correct answer is not, well, what are you offering? The correct answer is, I'm offended that you asked that question. That is, you're indicating that there's certain relationships that are sacred. The problem being that what's rational in the realm of choosing our friends and allies is not so rational when we are setting policy for an entire society, when we're doing science, where we might really want to have the most accurate calculation of costs and benefits, and not project our friendships and our romantic relationships onto running a government or doing science.
But why do, in our heads, we let off the hook fiction writers? I don't feel like anyone looks at Stephen King. You read his books, you see what he's capable of thinking of. Yeah. But I don't feel like we project that onto him. We like Stephen King. We're like, oh, he's probably a good guy. I don't think people, do you know what I mean?
No, it's a great question. And actually, I don't know if anyone, I would love to see someone explore this, so I'll just toss off some ideas. Now, it's not totally innocuous, as in the case of Salman Rushdie. It worked with Stephen King, and it didn't work so well for Salman Rushdie. And even in the case of, our culture, there have been novelists who have been condemned. I think it was Bret Easton Ellis who depicted scenes of female sexual torture and mutilation that were a little too close for comfort. And there was, at least at the time, some of this lack of forgiveness that we do, you're right, extend to Stephen King. Partly it's, I'm going to riff here because I don't know the answer, but I think it's a fascinating question. Yeah. Partly there may be certain conventions where, because the convention already exists, someone working within that convention is given a pass. And the murder mystery is a classic example. The Agatha Christie and that whole genre of are ones where we as a culture have anointed it as an acceptable cultural form, and we don't think the worse for the writers who operate within that genre. And it may be that for certain genres of horror, there can be changing mores so that we do conventionalize them as an acceptable genre or form. Although there are sometimes tensions at the boundaries, like where you do have some guardians, blue noses saying that violent entertainment, Quentin Tarantino, comics in the 1950s, certain kinds of violent movies, and indeed different constituencies do make different moral arguments, such as the arguments against pornography or against sexualized violence against women, where someone who the genre itself may be deemed dangerous, and the people who do think those thoughts might be morally condemned. But anyway, it's maybe there's a PhD thesis for some brilliant English literature student in that.
Yeah. For sure. Someone needs to analyze American Horror Story, the TV series, because that is as extreme as can be, but I don't think the writers of it get get in trouble.
It'd be interesting to for someone to go over the history of popular fiction, and I think there probably at every historical era there probably are debates and moral condemnation at the boundaries, and then the culture itself can sometimes change the boundaries.
Yeah, I guess this is just another one of the examples where context is everything. If you're on a date and you share the fact that you have fantasies, and have conjured up ideas of, a serial killer and in a small town with supernatural elements, your date's going to run for the hills. But if you're at a sci-fi convention and you talk about your new plot for a story, people are like, oh, that's really clever and creative. So this is
indeed
one of those cases of context. Yeah. So why is rationality so uncool?
Yeah, people do. First of all, there is the confusion that we talked about before between rationality and coldness, joylessness, dourness. That's just if you'll pardon the expression, that's just irrational. It's a non sequitur. There is, and there always has been since the 19th century, there has been a romantic movement that valorizes spontaneity, authenticity, and of course the Romantics have all the great art. So that has led to the cool connection.
Yeah. Well, do you think you're making it cool?
I would love to. I think it's probably beyond my powers, but if that were an outcome, I would be delighted.
I think, and by the way, I do think you are to a certain extent, but I think that you need to if you're a book launch, you need to pair with Snoop Dogg
Yes.
and I'm not, I'm serious, and get him being I love this new book, on rationality and why it matters, while he's smoking a joint or something. And, I feel like,
there is, there's certain, comedians who are, who work in that vein, like Bill Maher. Also there is this kind of eccentric, culture called the rationality community that I think probably unsuccessfully tries to make rationality cool, although at least they make it a thing. And as I say, and there are people who are associated with it: Scott Alexander, Julia Galef, Elliot Yudkowsky, to some extent Robin Hanson, Scott Aronson. The problem being, there are a couple of problems. One of them is, like any community, clubs develop their own internal culture very quickly, as we know as psychologists. Throw a bunch of 11-year-olds together, and pretty soon they have their own lingo, their own habits, and that's true of any community. The other being that ultimately having a club for rationality kind of misses the point. It's like everyone should be rational. It shouldn't be a niche like stamp collecting or cosplay. Of course, I think they'd be the first to agree, and I give them credit for trying to put it on the radar as something that is at least potentially cool, and that ought to be cooler.
Yeah, it shouldn't be geeky.
It should not be geeky.
Exactly. To be rational. Yeah, I agree. And look, I think that part of the blame is the Spock character. But the more that I read your book and really understand what you're saying, I feel like Spock was more logical than rational, because to be rational, there's this what does a person want? There's a very human dimension of it, in the way that you describe it.
Indeed.
That perhaps.
Indeed. And of course, warmth, love, friendship. Our being social animals and emotional animals, there's nothing irrational about that. Except when it conflicts with other goals, or it conflicts with someone else's goals for love and pleasure and warmth and social connection.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed. Wow. There's so much rich content in your book. I'm trying to think through okay, where do I want to go next? Let's talk about the tragic trade-off between hits and false alarms.
Oh, yes. So this is,
or misses and correct rejections. What's a rational observer to do?
Right. This is one of the motivations for writing this book is an intuition that I think many people in our field sometimes have, Namely, they're just some tools that we use to understand phenomena that really ought to be part of conventional wisdom. And one of them is the tool that you and I and our students and fellow academics learned in perception class of what's called signal detection theory. Originally applied, at least in our field, applied to the human subject in the booth with the headphones, pressing a button whenever he hears a sound. And has he heard it? Hasn't he? Well, there's no answer to that question when the sound is just at the very threshold of hearing. He can either say, well, yeah, I guess I heard it, or I'm not sure whether I heard it. A lot depends on whether you pay him for correct detections, hits, whether you penalize him for false alarms. And there's a mathematics as to how the ideal observer ought to respond in cases where they're detecting something under conditions of noise. They may detect it, they may not. And there's you can predict what, as they set their trade-off, their cutoff, between being trigger happy or yay saying, saying yes in the slightest hint, being much more conservative, being gun shy, nay saying, defaulting to no unless they're really positive. How do you set that threshold? Well, it depends on how bad the costs are for a false alarm compared to a miss. So there's a mathematics on how to do that optimally, but the way of thinking, namely, often in life, we just don't know the truth. We're fallible. None of us is omniscient. We have a good guess. We like to think that when we think we see something or detect something or hear something, it's true more often than not, but it can't be true all the time. What do we do? And the answer is, well, think carefully about how bad it is to be wrong in each of those two ways. Namely, you miss or you false alarm, and set your cutoff accordingly. Now, why is that relevant? Well, it's relevant to things like medical decision making. There's a blob on a scan. Is it cancer or is it a harmless cyst? First of all, in all signal detection problems, the imperative should be to increase your sensitivity. That is, fine-tune your judgment, your instruments, your forensics, so that you pull apart the signal and noise and there are the fewest possible opportunities for confusion. But given that you're never going to be perfect, when you should set your cutoff mindful of the each type of cost. In the case of a cancer, it could be how bad would it be to have painful and disfiguring surgery if I am cancer-free, versus how much of a risk am I taking with my life if I really do have cancer and I fail to operate. In the case of the judicial system, and I talk about signal detection theory in the courtroom, there's evidence as to whether the suspect committed a crime or not. It's never perfect. A jury nonetheless has to render a verdict. We reckon the costs in that case not in pain and suffering, not in dollars and cents, but in terms of justice. How abominable is it to send an innocent person to prison, or even worse, to send them to the gallows, versus how much justice is denied if you let a guilty person go free. No correct answer, since there's never a objectively correct answer for questions of goals, of costs, including moral costs. But it's good to be clear as to what costs you're willing to pay or not. Classically, the criterion, going back to Judge Blackstone, is better to let 10 guilty people go free than to falsely convict one innocent. Now, even that's not totally arbitrary. I think you can make arguments as to why that's reasonable, but it's an example that's straight out of signal detection theory of figuring out the costs of the two kinds of errors and setting a cutoff accordingly.
Oh, this is tricky stuff. I mean, there's trade-offs are always tricky, right?
Trade-offs are always tricky, but what is always good is to know when you're faced with them. Again, subject to Phil Tetlock's point that sometimes people don't like to think about trade-offs. They might even think it's immoral to think about trade-offs. We're to trade one
Yeah,
thing off
it
against
is.
another, such as, should people be allowed to sell their kidneys on eBay? There is an argument there that, everyone wins, no one's the worse off, but there's a lot of moral opposition to anything that smacks of quid pro quo when it comes to a sacred commodity, namely organs.
Oh, for sure. I mean, there's lots of examples we could bring up.
Prostitution is a contemporary example. Sex work, as we now call it, where there's a debate has been revived. In older times, we forget that there was this debate, but people were able to buy their way out of jury duty or out of military service. They were able to sell their votes. So these things do change with the moral evolution of societies.
I do feel like, in general, though, utilitarian reasoning is not as cool.
Well, yes, and my colleague.
Like, you have a heart. You don't have a heart if you have utilitarian.
Well, I think we're often divided. I think you're right that it does seem. I think my colleague Joshua Green calls it nerd morality, and it is a kind of it's a cost-benefit analysis. On the other hand, a lot of what we credit as our most glorious milestones of moral progress came from utilitarian reasoning, like the decriminalization of homosexuality. It's a straightforward utilitarian argument. No one's harmed. No harm, no foul. Or animal rights movement, that suffering is bad. It doesn't matter how smart you are. It's a question of how much you can suffer. The decriminalization of heresy. No one's, as Thomas Jefferson put it, it doesn't matter to me whether my neighbor believes in one God or 10 gods. It neither picks my pocket nor breaks my leg. That's a utilitarian argument. And argument for women's equality. There are many, many arguments that, in fact, appeal to the notion that, ain't no one's business if I do. If no one gets hurt, what consenting adults do in private, these are all utilitarian arguments. And so paradoxically, they're cool in the sense that they often are on the progressive side of things, and they do overall tend to win the day. But if you lay them out as calculations, then you're right. They seem tragically unhip.
Yeah, it's just the word utilitarian doesn't sound
that itself is bad branding.
I was just going to say it's got an image problem. Well, I think we have reached the point of our interview where we can finally discuss the pandemic of poppycock.
Indeed, and I could not get away without a chapter that I call "What's Wrong with People," knowing that if you bring up the topic of rationality, the first question you get is, "Why is the world losing its mind?" And there isn't a single answer to that, because there isn't a single kind of poppycock. But I think it's in part it comes from the fact that we partly motivated reasoning, namely because rationality is always in service of a goal. That goal needn't always be universal objective truth. It can be my own reputation, esteem, respect, deference. It can be the glory of my sect, my tribe, my coalition, my party. The so-called my side bias, which our friend Keith Stanovich has recently written a book about. So that's a major component. People care more about glorifying their political coalition than achieving universal objective truth. So that's one. Another is that we're all, as humans, vulnerable to certain kinds of deep-seated intuitions. We're dualists, as Paul Bloom has argued, that we think that people have a body and a mind, and from there it's a short step to imagining minds that aren't attached to bodies, namely souls and ghosts and spirits, and hence ESP and psychic powers. We are all essentialists, as Susan Gelman and others have argued. We think that living things have a internal invisible essence that gives them their form and their powers, and so we're subject to homeopathy. We're skeptical about vaccines. We're open to bloodletting and emetics and detoxification. things that intuitively feel like ridding the body of poisons. Hugo Mercier has shown that bloodletting is found in many, many cultures as a kind of quack cure. We're all teleologists. Deb Kellerman has emphasized this, so that we know that our own tools and plans and artifacts were designed with a purpose, and it's a short step to think that the world was designed for a purpose. The universe, everything happens for a reason. So it's easy to become creationists. So these are all implanted in us probably because of our evolutionary history. The question isn't why people believe these things, but why some of us don't believe them. Why do we actually believe that the mind is a product of the brain? Why do we believe that signs of design in the living world come from evolution? Well, it's because some of us not only have a scientific education, but we trust the scientists. There are people. What they say is good enough for us. If you aren't in that social sphere of influence, then you're liable to fall back either on your own intuitions or on communities that ratify those intuitions that might run afoul of the scientific consensus. But the scientific consensus you think of as just another clique, another tribe. They're not my clique or my tribe. Finally, I think there is a sense that why people believe weird things, it depends on what you mean by belief. And there's a category of belief that isn't the same as literal belief that there's milk in the fridge or gas in the car, where it's provably true or false. Robert Abelson, the great social psychologist, differentiated between distal beliefs and testable beliefs, where there's a whole realm of things like, does God exist? What's the origin of the universe? What are the bankers and presidents and powerful people actually doing in secret? Where you can't find out if you're an ordinary person, and you don't really care because you can never find out anyway. And so you believe things that are socially uplifting, that make your side look good, make the other side look bad, that are entertaining. And we all, to some extent, swallow these not quite true, not quite false beliefs in religion, in historical fiction, in national mythology, where, whether they're literally true or false, well, we just don't care that much, but we do know that they are inspiring, uplifting, entertaining. And when it comes to beliefs outside of people's personal sphere of day-to-day living, whether they believe it is not a matter of whether they can show that they're true or false, but whether it is morally empowering to believe them. And I think a lot of crazy beliefs, was Barack Obama a Muslim? Did Hillary Clinton run a pedophile ring out of the basement of a pizzeria? If you say you believe it, it isn't so much that you have grounds for believing it, but it's a way of saying, boo, Hillary. Namely, that's the kind of thing that she could be capable of. She's such a bad person.
Well, there was a phrase that I thought was really interesting. It's called expressive rationality.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that that really resonated with me, and the distinction between these two realms, as you put it, and the distinction between reality and mythology. Mythology is very powerful. It can have a very powerful effect, as many cult leaders over the years have discovered, and religious leaders and political leaders. It's all the same thing. Really.
Yeah, and a way of thinking about it, and this is played out very convincingly by Jonathan Rauch in his new book, The Constitution of Knowledge. So we almost shouldn't ask the question, why do people believe weird things, as much as why do at least some people some of the time believe true things? And the answer to that is, it's not because they are particularly rational, they have better brains, or it's because they have embedded themselves in a community with norms and rules and institutions that are explicitly designed to weed out falsehoods and to steer the entire community towards truth. Institutions like science with empirical testing, and scholarship with peer review, and journalism with fact-checking, and the court system with adversarial proceedings, and government with checks and balances, and free speech. And by letting kind of one person's biased thinking bump up against another person's biased thinking, then no one gets to impose their crazy beliefs on everyone else, but the community as a whole is playing a game that will move them all toward truth when it works, although, of course, it's always imperfect and it's always being corroded.
Yeah. I mean, if you live your life like a scientist, like 24/7, then you never have a belief, right?
Well,
like that word doesn't really compute.
I wouldn't put it that way. I mean, you could have a degree of credence. You could be a Bayesian and say, I put 0.9 in a scale of 0 to 1 credence on that belief. So that is, I believe it. I might even, and then going back to signal detection theory, I'm going to act on it even though I'm uncertain, because the costs of being wrong and not acting on it are worse than the costs of acting on it if I'm wrong and it's not really true. You assume that there is a truth and that you don't know it. You try, the community tries, you try to get as close as possible, always leaving open the possibility that you might be mistaken.
Right. So I think it makes sense to believe that there's a certain high probability that something is true, in terms of probabilities, but that seems like a different statement.
That's right. And that is,
I believe this to be certain.
Exactly. And that's the Bayesian approach, is to treat degree of credence as a probability, a number between 0 and 1. But you're right that it's part of the commitment to epistemic humility, to fallibility, to considering the possibility that you might be mistaken, that is inherent to science, it's inherent to democracy, it's inherent to liberalism, it's inherent to humanism.
Here. You make this point. You say, I love this. I think I'm going to tweet this quote of yours after our conversation. Each of us has a motive to prefer our truth, but together we're better off with the truth. I'm just going to conclude this interview by saying, in an era in which rationality seems both more threatened and more essential than ever, I do agree that your book is an affirmation of the urgency of rationality. So congratulations on the publication of the book, Stephen.
Thanks so much, Scott. As always, it's been stimulating and enjoyable to speak with you.
Yeah, I feel the same way. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Psychology Podcast. If you'd like to react in some way to something you heard, I encourage you to join in the discussion at thepsychologypodcast.com. That's thepsychologypodcast.com. Thanks for being such a great supporter of the show, and tune in next time for more on the mind, brain, behavior, and creativity.